Hey folks, welcome back to the Trusty Aeronaut channel. Today we're going to be talking about small Continentals. We got the Chief opened up for annual, and we're going to go over the small Continentals from the A65 all the way up to the O200. And this video is mainly for people that don't have a lot of experience with the small Continentals. Maybe you got your license flying in a 172 or a Cherokee with a Lycoming 0320 or something like that, and you're thinking about getting into these old tail draggers, and a lot of them are powered by the small Continentals.
My name is Jared White. Join me as we explore Northern California and beyond, enjoying the somewhat more affordable side of general aviation.
Chief is rolling.
These old engines are pretty reliable, and you can find them on the front of old tail draggers and air coupes and 150s for a pretty reasonable price. There are some engines that kind of came before the A65, but they're pretty few and far between. If you find one of those, you're on your own. So we're going to start off with the A65 and the A75. And I kind of list them, I've listed all the engines here by displacement, because that's kind of an easy way to kind of tell the differences between the models. And the A65 is 65 horsepower. The stroke is 3 5/8 inches of stroke. The bore is 3 7/8. Compression ratio 6.3 to 1. And in that same column is the A75, which is the engine we have on the Tailorcraft. And it's basically the same engine with a few modifications. I think they oil the cylinder walls, and there's a few changes, but it just spins faster, so it has a higher red line, and that's how they get the extra horsepower. And there are ways, you'd have to talk to your mechanic, but you can turn an A65 into an A75 pretty easily. If you're doing a top end overhaul or something like that, you could bump it up to the A75. And then moving up to the 190 cubic inch zone, which is the C75 and the C85. The C85 is what I have on the Chief. It's the same stroke, but you can see they bored it out. So the bore is now 4 1/16. And the compression ratio stays the same. They also changed the name into the C series engine. So you have the C75 and the C85. The C75, I think you find those on air coupes a lot, is basically a C85. There's very little difference between those two engines. I think the only real difference is just the jet size and the carburetor. So I think there are ways with your mechanic to rebadge a C75 into a C85. Of course, on a certified plane, it would have to fit the type certificate. So it may not be as easy. It's easier said than done sometimes with that type of thing. And then moving up to the O200 and the C90, the stroke gets a little bit longer, but the bore stays the same. So if you kind of look at what they've done with the engine sizes, they bored out for the C75, C85 to get to 190 cubic inches, and they bored and stroked the O200s to get the 200 cubic inches. And then they raised the compression ratio a little bit too. And the O200 is the highest revving of the small Continentals. I think the red line on those is 2750 or something like that. And the C90 is also a 200 cubic inch. There's not a whole lot of difference between the C90 and the O200. The C90 in stock configuration is kind of the holy grail of small Continentals, at least in the certified side of things. And the reason is it has the same displacement as the O200, but it develops its power lower in the RPM band than the O200. Everybody says they have a lot more torque. I think the main reason for that is that at least the early C90s had a different cam, and so they were just set up to run stronger at kind of the lower RPMs, kind of where you're taking off. And that brings me to my chart here that I found from an old version of Cub Clues, and I'll put it up on the screen for you. And it's pretty interesting to look at because it shows you all the different RPMs, and as you kind of move down the chart, the black area is the recommended cruise RPM. But let's go down, let's take the C85 line, let's go down to, let's say 2300 RPM, which that's about what the Chief is turning at when I'm wide open. And the C85 is putting out 60 horsepower, but if you go all the way across, the C90 is putting out 72 horsepower at 2300, and the O200 is only putting out 57 horsepower at 2300 RPM. And if you kind of look at this list, the C85 and C90 really put out more horsepower at kind of those lower takeoff RPMs. But when you're flying out in the backcountry and trying to get off the ground quick and climb out of a canyon, having the horsepower, the torque at those lower RPMs that your engine's probably turning at when you're climbing out is nice. And and your RPM is kind of directly related to the prop you have on there. So there's a lot that goes into setting up your plane to perform well. But if you're looking for something to go blasting around in the backcountry and take off short, I think the C90 is the engine you want. One of the other things you'll notice on the small Continentals is they normally have a dash after the model number. So you'll have A65-8 or C85-12, and the 8 generally means it's not set up to have a starter or a alternator or a generator, so it's going to be a hand propper. The -12 versions, which you'll see on the C75, C85, the C90, those usually have a backplate or an accessory cover that can support a starter or a generator. Let's take a quick pause here, and we'll go look at the A75 on the tailcraft, and you can see what that looks like. All right, let's take a quick look under the hood of the old tailcraft here at a Continental A75. So let's see if you guys can get a look at that. This is the A75-8, which means that it's not going to have any provisions in the back on the accessory case for a starter or an alternator. So you can see there's nothing there. This is where a starter would usually go on your small Continentals. And then down here, there's no spot for an alternator. That's your A75. Pretty much the same engine as the A65, just with a little bit different internals, so you can run it at a higher RPM. All right, now we'll take a quick look at my Chief here, which has the C85-12, and the starter and alternator spots are blocked off. All right, so here's the C85 on the Chief, and as you can see, it's the -12 version because it has a plate here where the starter would go, and then down below there's another plate, it's kind of hard to see, where the alternator or generator would go. All right, so now we kind of have an idea of the different models in the small Continental line, and for the most part, they're all about, I think they're all 1800-hour TBO, which is the recommended time before overhaul. And at least from what I've seen, the bottom end of the engine, which is the crank and the cam, those usually last to overhaul without too much trouble. But the top end, the cylinders, some people say you get 500 hours out of them, some people say you get 1,000, but most of the time you'd be surprised to see an engine go all the way to 1,800 hours on the original cylinders. And oftentimes, guys will, if you burn a valve or one gets low compression or something like that, you can remove one cylinder at a time and just overhaul that one. So, having to overhaul a cylinder isn't the end of the world. Now I want to move on to talking about the accessories and some of the other things that are kind of bolted onto the engine that really can affect the value. And if you're shopping around for a plane, you're going to want to kind of take a look at everything that the engine has on it and the time on those components to really get an idea of the value of the plane you're hoping to buy. So probably the first thing that I notice on an engine is whether it has a regular oil filter or not. Most of them came with just a metal screen originally, and the metal screen works okay, but you're recommended to change your oil every 25 hours with a screen, where with an oil filter, you can push that interval out to 50 hours. So if you're flying a lot, it's nice to not have to change your oil every 25 hours. As far as the cost savings, these puppies I think are $35, $36 a pop. So, by the time you change an oil filter, you don't really save that much in oil savings. But it's just nice to kind of stretch out the interval a little bit farther. As far as wear and tear on the engine, usually the engine will make TBO fine with the screen. My 150 just had the metal screen, and it is still running, and it's past TBO. I think long term, if you're hoping to overhaul the engine, the internal components, your crank and cam and stuff like that, generally will last hopefully will last a little bit longer if you're using an oil filter. So there are quite a few different adapters and ways that you can add oil filters to the engine, after you have it. But generally, it's nice to just find one that already has been converted and has an oil filter already on it. The magnetos are probably the most expensive thing that you're going to have bolted to the back of your engine. And with the old Continentals, you'll see a variety of different magnetos on them. A lot of the older magnetos are probably fine, and if they're maintained, they can be airworthy. But if you do end up buying an engine with older magnetos, keep in mind the cost to upgrade to newer magnetos. I think the kit to upgrade the A65 is over $7,000 from Aircraft Spruce, and it's not even in stock right now. So, and you can buy the individual magnetos themselves for less, but on the A65 and the A75 and any of the Dash 8 engines, they require magnetos that turn the opposite direction of the later C85 and C75 and O200 magnetos. So you have to have a special magneto for those engines, and also they use a kind of a special magneto gear that is hard to find, and so you can spend a lot of money trying to piece together a set of modern magnetos for these older engines. Sometimes a big reason why a lot of guys will upgrade one or both of their magnetos on the older engines is because the newer magnetos will have a impulse coupling. So the reason you want the impulse coupling is because it makes the engine easier to start. And a lot of times you'll see engines, the old A65s or C85s, will have one older magneto, and then they'll put a slick on there to get the impulse coupling. And then you'll start it on the left or right magneto, whichever magneto has the impulse coupling. And what the impulse coupling does, like you can see here, is basically as you turn the prop over, it winds up, and then it gets to a certain point and it'll click. And so basically, I almost shocked myself. Basically what happens is that spins the magneto at a little bit faster rate, helps generate a spark, and it also it retards the timing so that the spark happens closer to where you want it to happen for starting the engine. And then once the engine spins up, it'll the weights come out in these things, and then it just goes back to normal operation. But if you're hand propping your A65 or your C85 or whatever you have, you definitely would like to have a magneto with an impulse coupling on it. And if you're looking at an airplane that has an electrical system like a 120 or a 140 or an air coupe or perhaps a Tailorcraft or even some of the later Aronkas that have lights and starters and all that stuff, you're going to want to look at the starter and the generator. This right here is an old pull starter off my 150, and it's kind of an old method. There's a cable that runs into the cockpit, and it pulls this, and there's a little contact here, so that powers up the starter, and then it also pushes out, let's see if you can see that, it pushes out the gear and engages it, and then it cranks your engine over. And these old pull starters work great, but they're not light. So when these go bad, a lot of times guys will put in the I think sky-tek makes a lighter weight, more modern starter that's a push button starter, and there's another brand out there as well. So if you see an engine that has a newer starter on it, it'll probably be a little more reliable for you. I had this starter on my 150 and it worked great. So there's still a lot of planes out there with these old starters, but they are a little heavier. And then you also want to look at the generator or the alternator, and the old generators work okay, but they don't put out as much power, and it's not as even. we had a generator in my dad's old tri-pacer, and if we had all the lights on, basically you'd run the battery dead. So it's nice to have a newer alternator because it'll put out more power, and when you're flying around at night, you won't be concerned about draining your battery if all your lights are on. The other thing you're going to want to look at is the carburetor. And there's basically two carburetors that come on these small Continentals. A lot of the A65s, A75s will have the Stromberg carburetor, which is a fine carburetor. It's just as safe, I think, as anything else. But generally, people will wire shut the mixture control. It uses kind of a different kind of mixture control that, well, people say they don't work as well at lower altitudes. If you get up high, like over 5,000 feet, then they kind of start to work, but they can be a little finicky and kind of hard to figure out. So a lot of times you'll see the small Continentals with a Stromberg carburetor, and the mixture will just be wired full rich. And that works fine if you're down in the valley, but if you're trying to fly kind of higher altitudes, you really want to have a nice mixture control, which if you have an engine with the Marvel carburetor, then most of those will have a mixture control, and that's what the C85 has, or in the Chief. And when I'm flying high, up in Idaho and up in Nevada, it's really nice to be able to lean out the mixture and get kind of the most power that you can get out of your engine. I don't know if you'll see too many of this A75 or A65 engines with the Marvel carburetor on them, but you do see it on the C85s and the C90s. So if you can, try and find an engine with the Marvel carb if you're planning on flying up in the mountains. All right, so you found the airplane you want to buy. It has a nice fresh set of Magnetos on it. It's got a good carburetor. Doesn't have too many hours on the engine, and you're going out to check it out, and you really should bring a mechanic. If you bring your mechanic, he's going to look at the engine, he's going to look at the airplane, and he's going to be able to tell you what he's going to want you to fix when it comes time for annual. And I can't stress enough how important it is to have your mechanic look at an airplane you're going to buy. The reality is that doesn't always happen. I've known friends and myself to buy airplanes, and we just go look at them and we buy them and then take them home, and then 6 months later the annual comes up and your mechanic comes to look at it and he's like, oh well, you got to replace this and I don't like that, and you end up spending a lot of money with your first annual. But if you do decide to go out and look at an airplane or buy an airplane by yourself, there are some things you can look at and check out that you'd be wise to do. We're going to go over just a few of those things that you can kind of look at on your own, and it'll give you a little bit of an idea of how healthy your engine is that you're about to buy. So the first thing you're going to want to check is the compression on your engine. And you can look in the log books and you'll see most of your Continental cylinders will be in the 70s, probably 72, 74. Sometimes you might see one at 78, but most of the time they're going to be in the kind of the low 70s, and you'll probably have one like in the mid 60s, a 65 or something. And you can, without pulling the spark plugs and getting out your compression tester and doing all that, you can just rotate the prop by hand and you can feel the low cylinders. And if you have one that's really low in the 40s or 50s or something, you can feel it, and you'll know that that's something you need to be concerned about. You can also, if you have a friend, they can listen to the exhaust or the intake or the breather and kind of tell where that low cylinder might be leaking from. Before you start cranking over on the prop though, you want to make sure that it's not going to start up on you. And remember, we talked about the Magneto and the impulse coupling. Anytime you move that prop, there's a chance that the engine could fire up. And these Magnetos, with the P-lead, they basically ground out. That's how you turn them off. And so if you have a weak wire or a switch that's not operating properly in the airplane, you may not realize it, and so you could have a hot Magneto, and when you go to crank the prop around, you could fire that thing up and really hurt yourself. So the best idea is to just unhook your spark plug wires, just to make sure that you're not going to have a spark in your engine. But if you can't do that, then you can start the engine and then make sure you can shut it off with the mags, and that'll tell you that you're shutting off both your mags. So I've tested the switch and the P leads on this plane recently, so we're going to go and we're going to crank it over a few times. We're going to feel the compression. There's one. There's two. There's three. That one was a little light. There's four. I think I have one exhaust valve that might be leaking a little bit, but I just checked the compression on it during our annual, and they were all good. So it probably just, this hasn't run for a while, so I'm sure once we run it, it'll seat a little better. And that's the other thing you can do too, is if you check the compression cold, then you can come back after you run it and feel it again. And a lot of times, those valves will seat a little bit better, and it might feel a little better. It's no substitute for an actual compression check, but it will kind of tell you if you got a cylinder that's really low. So if your compression feels good on your engine and everything looks nice, there's a few other things you can look at. These old Continentals like to leak oil. There's a few spots where they really like to leak oil. One is they'll leak it right out of the valve cover gasket. The old valve cover gaskets were kind of this hard material, but a lot of guys will switch over to the silicone gaskets, which are not too hard to change over. Your mechanic can do that for you pretty easily, and that'll help stop the leaks coming from underneath your valve covers. They like to leak out of the pushrod tubes kind of below the cylinder. That's a little harder to stop from leaking. You kind of have to pull the whole cylinder off and then replace these little rubber gaskets, if you will. If you want to chase oil leaks on them, you can kind of stop the cylinders from leaking with not a ton of work. Sometimes they'll leak out of the front main seal, and that's a little bit of a project, but you don't have to tear the engine apart. You can put new main seals over once you remove the prop, you can change out the main seal. If your engine's leaking between the case halves, that's going to be a little more of a project to fix. But yeah, a lot of old timers will say that, I think, what's the saying? if it's not leaking, it's out of oil. So I wouldn't be too worried too much about some oil leaks out of your old Continental, as long as it's not dripping steady onto the ground. Then it'll probably fly. One of the other things you can look at is your exhaust. The exhaust on these things, they don't last forever. They tend to rust out, and you can spend a fair amount of money putting new exhaust on your plane. I just replaced this exhaust stack on the Chief because it had a little crack in here that we discovered, and we replaced it with another used stack that was in better shape, and I think it cost me, I think it was $150 or something. So you can, depending on the kind of exhaust you have on the Champs and Chiefs, a lot of them just have these straight headers, which are easy to replace and pretty inexpensive. If you get into an airplane with a muffler and bigger heat exchangers, then that can be costly to replace that stuff. So you just kind of want to look at that, and then just take a good look at the engine and look for cracks and other things that don't look right. This video is just kind of enough information to be dangerous. If you're considering buying an old tail dragger with a Continental or a Air Coupe or 150 or something, you really would be wise to have a mechanic look at it. Once an airplane's signed off, if it has a current annual, there's no requirement to have a mechanic look at something. You can go buy it and fly it around until that annual expires. But unless you really know what you're looking at, there's a good chance you're going to buy something that is going to end up costing you a lot of money down the road. At least with this video, you kind of have an idea of some of the features and things to look at when you're shopping around, and can have an idea of why one airplane that looks the same as another might be $20,000 more. All right, that's about all I got for this video. If you enjoy this kind of content, I'm going to make a playlist with a few other videos that might be helpful if you're considering going out and buying an old tail dragger or an old Air Coupe or 150 with a with a Continental in it, and I'll put that right over here. And then please leave a comment and let me know if I got anything wrong or if there's anything I missed. I'm just a pilot out here flying around in my planes. I'm not a mechanic or anything like that. So, I don't want to give people any wrong information. But leave me a comment. Let me know if I screwed anything up. And then if you enjoy riding along in the Super Chief, consider subscribing up here. All right. So long, folks.